So the question arose, why did we keep the apartment during hyperinflation in Romania, right? And basically it's a, well, multifaceted answer, but I'm just going to give you a couple of reasons. One was that not one person owned the house in the countryside. It was multiple families, right? Because the countryside house was owned by my grandmother, who still lived. And we would have needed to all move there, or maybe choose one family who would live there. And it was kind of hard to do that during the winter. There was not much trading or not much thing to do in the countryside in the winter in that house. So instead of just trying to live through the winter, we would move to the city, back to the city, because the apartment was easier to heat, and because the sides of the apartment are other apartments, and it was just much easier to heat, and we didn't have to use that much energy to heat the apartment. The other reason was that while we could leave the house because of where it was and who were the neighbors, unattended for maybe up to 2 weeks, 3 weeks, no problem, the apartment wasn't so, because it was in the city, and it was dangerous to leave an apartment even locked, unattended, for many weeks, or definitely a month or so. Because while you could rely somewhat on the neighbors to help you, there were instances where, like, I remember certain ethnic groups went from apartment to apartment, and they would live in the apartment, and they would use the apartment of others to the point where they would tear up the hardwood floor of the apartment and make an open fire in the apartment, live like that, use that fire for energy. If it was on the basement floor or the first floor, they even lived in the apartments with horses. One horse I remember seeing, right? And after, so they could ruin the apartment. So it was a different world than you would imagine, I guess. But you have to know that there's not worthwhile to sell an apartment during hyperinflation if you can keep it, right? If you can keep it, because even though nominally the apartment value, quote unquote, goes up in numbers of currency, the actual value compared to labor hours or food is actually going down very rapidly. So while, let's say, the apartment was at some point maybe 200,000, something like that, it went up to 2 million, 4 million, 8 million, but eventually 8 million was just 1 month's labor work, right? Because you can't eat an apartment, right? So people would move in together into smaller houses, smaller apartments together, and there was just kind of an abundance of unused apartments. So you could actually pick up apartments during hyperinflation fairly cheap, and we did actually as well. I wouldn't say it was that cheap, but my father did pick up apartments and storage places during the hyperinflation in the city. Now you got to watch out with that, because you have to know what are the demographics, what are the location, and kind of the economics of that city during hyperinflation. Because if you pick up the wrong place, lo and behold, you don't even have to go to hyperinflation. Just think about like Detroit, right? If you pick up a house in Detroit because you think, oh, this is a great opportunity, because once the auto business booms up, then you'll have all this money. Well, turns out that houses and apartments don't last too long if nobody is attending them. So you really have to watch out for what you're doing, and you have to discern, and you have to look at it logically. Is it worthwhile holding? Is it worthwhile buying? But big opportunities come around during hyperinflations for those who are ready, right? And those who have cash, but cash in other forms, not just the currency that is hyperinflating. So the other reason was, of course, that my father was able to get an actual job in the city while he was not been able to get a job at the countryside. It was really just producing food. But once we had enough food to last a year, last a winter, you could go into the city, and he did machining work. So because import and other like stuff that was produced in other countries, we could no longer import it. Everyone had to make their own door hinges, their own locks, repair stuff. There was a lot of stuff that, you know, needed repairing, needed to be worked, needed to be made in the city because gasoline was very expensive. So it really boils down to local economies, and you can really take advantage of that in the city if you can produce, if you know a trade or something like that. So it was more complex. It's not just one way or another where, you know, people who talk about these things but have not really truly experienced hyperinflation in a city or in a country, you know, all of it comes down to what you learn from TV or what you learn from books, or what, you know, people romanticize as how they are going to survive stuff. But in actual situations, it's much different, and you have to be flexible, nimble, flexible, be able to move, be able to come back, go somewhere, be able to travel, and make the most of the opportunities that you have, which is, you know, for those of you who are high in spirit, and for those of us who are in high in energy and we are entrepreneurial, all of this is just a big opportunity to, you know, make generational wealth, and while serving your neighbors and serving the people around you. So I hope that answers the question why we didn't just stay in one place, and why we didn't just hunker down somewhere in the outskirts of town. So yeah, that's it. Feel free to ask more questions on the Telegram channel.